Hello, I'm Paul Briley, and you're listening to Off the Comma. I'm a human who cares about supporting other humans. On this podcast, we explore all facets of what it means to feel stuck in life. We talk with people just like us who found themselves sitting on a comma and not knowing where to go next. We'll unpack the experience with them, where they've been stuck, what it feels like, what they experienced, and what they learned. My goal is to inspire you by seeing yourself in others. I believe that when we feel more connected and seen, magic can happen. And remember, if you find yourself sitting on a comma in your life, you can also talk to me without a microphone. To explore coaching with me and getting off the comma in your own life, check out my information and book a call with me at offthecomma.com. And I'm also doing something different. I'm curating my own sponsor community, local businesses and professionals who I handpick and who align with our vision here. Be sure to check them out, learn more about them on my website and my YouTube channel. In the meantime, let's get into this week's conversation. And we're back with another exciting episode of Off the Comma and another exciting story. And for those of you who listen regularly, you know it's just every week there is another amazing person with some really kind of powerful story to share. Sometimes they're really, really vulnerable. Sometimes they're very very uplifting. I mean, just we get all kinds of stories here, basically, and all of them are amazing and all of them are important. And this week will be no exception. And this week I have with us Lilia Bogoeva, and she is someone who's also new to my circle. We've had quite a number of guests who are new to my circle. So I haven't had a chance to meet Lilia before, and I'm looking forward to meeting her and learning about her through her story today. And I'm going to stop rambling and talking like I normally do and hand it over to you, Lilia. Welcome. Thank you for coming. And as you introduce yourself, I'd love for you to share with us, like, how would you like to be known? And then tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into your story here in a little bit.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. So I am Lilia Bogoeva. My professional title is the Inner Demon Crusher because I am all about making mental health fun and empowering through creative arts. I really like showing people how they can face their inner demons with courage and resilience, but that at the same time, it doesn't always have to be so agonizing and rough. Sometimes it can actually be enjoyable and enlightening, especially when you use creative arts like music and comic books, graphics, and dance, storytelling like I do. So I really like seeing people be able to build a higher sense of self-awareness and actually enjoy the process.
That's powerful. And I
Thank you.
I appreciate this kind of unique spin or focus or kind of emphasis from your approach of that. Obviously, mental health is such an important topic and a big topic, and it seems like everybody is now starting to really give it the attention that it deserves. And yet it can be, I mean, all of us as humans have experienced different moments in our lives, right? It can be very heavy. So I'm really looking forward to hearing how you bring kind of a different type of approach or a different type of framing to it.
Yeah, so what I do is this. So my main background is as a musician, dancer, and athlete. So I formed the band Carcaza in 2016. That's a metal band now based in Montgomery, Alabama. But the music itself is more of an experience for the listener and audience member. So I wanted to have a platform where I could also talk more in depth about the meaning behind why I make the music and how the arts can empower us. Because overall, my purpose in being a musician was to help myself improve my mindset. I needed to heal emotional wounds. I needed to become a better version of myself, build emotional intelligence and resilience. I felt like music and dance helped me a lot to do that. But through the music itself, I wasn't able to communicate that much. So that's why I also built my Inner Demon Crusher brand, where I talk about that. I'm a inspirational speaker. I do coaching where I help people find the best way to use creative arts to improve their mental health. And I created a comic book series called Lilia the Inner Demon Crusher. And that uses graphics, colors, and relatable stories to basically parody an artist's emotional healing journey through trauma and the comparison trap and imposter syndrome and overcoming all that stuff, battling those inner demons. I actually have visual fight scenes with the character versus the demons, which are portrayed as these big monsters that shoot flames and have these scary claws and all that stuff. So I really liked to do the graphic portrayal just as much as I like to tell the story behind it. And I've noticed a lot of people have resonated with that. When I show people copies of the little booklet, like, oh wow, that's so fresh and really helpful. Like, I make group workshops where we actually read through the comic book together, and people have had a lot of fun with that as well.
Nice. I so can personally appreciate this approach because, inner demons is a term that is so often used to describe like this narrative. And as a trained coach myself, we talk about the inner critic or the sabotaging voice. And so it seems like this is a really great way to kind of like bring to life the experiences that are often hard to describe.
Yeah. So. It definitely comes to life in the graphics. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Lilia, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I was just thinking, philosophically speaking, inner demons can mean something different to everyone. Some folks take it very literally as like an actual spiritual possession of dark energy, whereas I personally define it in my brand as anytime you're struggling with emotional turmoil, damaging habits, or the fear of expressing your authentic self. Those are the what I think are the three biggest categories of inner demons that people tend to struggle with these days. And I did wrap that all up in one really fun comic book, and I am going to make it a series. So in April 2024, I launched the very first one. That story is about workaholism versus food porn. And then I plan to release a new story each year. And in that case, workaholism is something that's very praised in our society. That they have hustle culture, the idea that if you just work hard enough, you don't have to feel any negative emotion. So many people are out there trying to just be so busy that they don't have time to feel negative about anything. But as my story illustrates, that doesn't really work. All it does is just pile more and more stress on top of you. And then the food porn is an analogy for those simple escapes that we try to find, but that are also just temporary fixes.
Well, I mean, we're already getting a really good taste, pardon the pun, a taste of what you're about and what you might be like. So I'm really eager to get into your story and learn more. Before we get into your story and the 5 questions, one of the things I do with every guest is, as you think ahead to the next 40 minutes or so, and in telling your story with us today, what intention would you have for yourself in telling your story today?
Okay, that's a good question. I definitely want to be authentic and clear. Yeah, authentic and clear.
Okay. Well, I support your intention, and my intention is to obviously create a space for you to tell your story and accomplish this. And also that, as with all of our guests and all of our storytellers, in the telling of your story, there will be people out there who hear a little bit of themselves in your story, see a little bit of themselves in you, and that hearing this will help them feel a little bit more connected, maybe a little bit less alone. And in the best of cases, feel a little bit more inspired or even empowered to go out and do something that they've been wanting to do.
Yes, I definitely strive to be an inspiration and bring empowering energy to people. So that's why I like to express through creative arts, because emotional turmoil can easily get very dark and gloomy, and we could get in this downward spiral where like, oh, I have these emotional
Hmm.
wounds, these damaging habits, I'm afraid of being my authentic self, and just feeling like that's all you can ever be, just this
Hmm.
walking ball of unresolved trauma that's doomed to keep getting in toxic spirals all the time. Whereas arts is not only more fun and refreshing, but it's also something that is action packed. Like, for
Hmm.
example, when you use music as a therapy, well, you're producing something, you're creating a piece of music, or you're learning how to play a piece of music, or you're making an analysis of an existing piece of music. But one way or another, you're creating something new. And let's say after an hour of this therapeutic music practice, you actually have something tangible to show for it. And the same
Hmm.
cannot be said of everything. You can just sit here and self reflect, but not really have anything to show for it. So that's what I really like about using arts. You actually produce something at the end of it.
Okay. Lilia, let's get into the first question. And the first question is, where in your life have you found yourself sitting on a comma?
Oh, yeah, several times. I mean, what comes to mind is just more recently when I was figuring out how I want to express my story. I know that experts are recommended or encouraged to write books. So it's like, okay, what if I wrote a book? But what kind? Should it be an audio book? Should it be a workbook? Should it be a more traditional, straightforward textbook? Should it be an instructional manual or just an autobiography? I was like, what fits best with me is the visuals and the action movement. So I went for a comic book for that reason.
Mm.
That's why mine is a graphic novel. But yeah, it's like this. Sometimes when we're creating a new project, I'm one of those people who will feel like the more I think, the more confused I get. I'm like, okay,
Mm.
comma, dot, dot, dot. Okay, I'll get stuck sometimes. I get this analysis paralysis where there are so many possibilities in my mind. It could be this, it could be that, but what should it be? And you're like, what should I do? And I'm trying to find the answers, but there really is no one clear cut answer. So that can definitely create a comma in our lives or a sticking point.
Okay. So you're saying that as you were kind of being called to start to create content to represent, what you stand for and the work that you do, you were called to write a book, and then this graphic novel, this graphic approach, artistic approach came to you. But then it sounds like what you're saying is that it the idea came, the what and the why maybe were clear, but then the how started to
Oh,
create more
yeah.
questions. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, for sure. Yes. Yes, it definitely took some time for me to manifest my ideas and
Hmm.
bring them into fruition.
So what was the most challenging part about this? Because I think a lot of people, and we talk about this. I mean, this is what we talk about on this podcast, right? And everybody has a different story to tell. But a lot of people would say, oh, well, you've kind of figured out what you want to do. That's the hard part. But so what was the difficult part of moving from the I know what I want to do into bringing it to life? What made this a comma for you?
Yeah, I'd say the most difficult part would be how exactly I portray the story. So these days we hear a lot about quote finding your niche. And I was like, okay, well, should I make this a story about trauma healing or about improving emotional intelligence? Should I make it really for professional artists? Or should I make it more for kids or more dark and serious for adults? So I was just trying to write the story, but at the same time think about things like target audience and making sure people understand it, stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that caused a lot of analysis paralysis for me, but ultimately ended up making this first installment called Workaholism versus Food Porn. It is fairly open. It's more a matter of it's for people who want to see a colorful and creative visual approach to addressing common mental health issues in our society today, because realistically, it's never just your trauma, just your addiction, just your imposter syndrome, just your competitive spirit, just your finances. Those all come together. And what I really wanted was to portray how all of those come together. These inner demons that are very multifaceted, and one feeds on top of another. So I feel like I accomplished that in my first graphic novel, so that was really good. And it ends up creating some more commas here and there, because then I'm like, okay, from here I made an online course where I read through the comic book. But then again, I was like, oh, well, how do I describe it? How do I tell people what this is all about in a way that they understand? What I found is that once I start with a basic concept, the listener will then fill in their own details. Basically, that's where the audience member can then make their own interpretation. Which, what I feel, art is a great way to practice free thinking, because it is about interpretation and not about someone telling you exactly what to do. So I feel like the way that I'm allowed that comma to start moving forward was to acknowledge that I don't need to provide every answer and explanation up front. I can leave this open space for the beholder to make their own interpretation of it and decide what it means to them.
That's really powerful, because, that's what a lot of folks will experience, myself included, when an idea is birthed. And then it's like the how to bring it to life. And then I don't know about for you, but for me, sometimes it's like how to make it all just right, how to make it all complete, how to make sure it has all the answers that everybody's looking for. And yet I'm hearing you say it's like that's a little bit of what made the process challenging, was trying to figure out how to bring it all together and have it be complete. And yet the artist in you is basically coming to this place of saying, wait a minute, no, I don't necessarily have to solve that for people. I need to bring it to people and let them kind of draw their own conclusions. Is that a fair way? Correct me where I'm wrong at any time I restate something.
Yes, because that is the whole point of creative arts, right? Is to be able to practice interpretation. So I'd say one of the biggest benefits of using an artistic approach to mental health is that you practice the all-important act of free thinking. Because there are so many self-improvement and mental health programs out there that like follow these kinds of steps, X number of steps in this order, and you've got to do it this way, and success looks exactly like this, failure looks like that. And there's not enough room for a person to then figure out what process they should follow for themselves and what success really looks like to you as an individual versus what failure looks like to you. So I was like, okay, Lilia, if I'm here coming up with, your typical self-improvement guru thing, which is like my revolutionary 5-step process to overcome emotional trauma and live your best life. It is A, B, C, D, E, F, G, that sort of thing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then like, I'm basically telling the viewer, I'm going to be doing your thinking for you, okay? You don't need to actually think with your real brain. I'm going to tell you what you want. Or you should want the same thing that I want. Like, I never wanted to do that at all. I more wanted to be the springboard. So I do believe that people have it within themselves to improve themselves through that mind, body, soul connection. And really, the key is helping the person to ignite their own spark from within instead of telling them exactly what they should want.
Lilia, let me go into the second question, and then we can kind of go back and forth as we normally do here. So you've kind of described for us, this experience of writing this book and actually bringing these other programs to life, and this whole kind of what I'm hearing as this sort of internal debate and decision around how much do I decide for the end user, the person who's reading or experiencing these things, and how much do I leave for them to determine and decide and interpret. The second question is, as you think back to this comma that you were sitting on, what did it create for you?
Definitely it created a lot of things, though. It forced me to understand, okay, why am I even having these confusions? A lot of them were related to, in some way, like people pleasing or conformity. Sometimes I look at others who seem to have a really good online business going for them and think that I
Mm-hmm.
should replicate exactly that.
Comparison, right?
Yeah, the
Yeah.
comparison trap I fell into, just to differentiate between my own will versus conveniently conforming to whatever the person next to me is thinking.
Okay.
So yeah, it created a lot, and I feel like it also created what I ultimately wanted to do, which was a platform by which I can basically tell my story in a nutshell, because it's called Lilia the Inner Demon Crusher. I modeled for it. Like I've modeled it after my life, but again, it's kind of like a twisted parody of it in some ways, because it's not just autobiographical and factual. It's more showing each concept and the way that one thing leads to another. But yeah, to be able to have this open platform where I can tell a specific story, but at the same time, the story is still open to individual interpretation and can help a lot of different people in different ways.
Mm. I'd love to reflect this back because, as I look at every story, every interview that we have, there have been a number of writers who have come on and told their story. Sometimes it's about their experience getting a book off the ground, or maybe the book was always there and they just needed to get it published or what have you. So I've heard from a lot of writers about all these different experiences. And it's so interesting to hear what it's like to think about how the thing you've written is going to be received. And it's what I want to acknowledge you for is the amount of thought you've put into how much you use the word, like, oh shoot, I wrote it down, flexibility basically, or how much interpretation, right, was the word that you used.
Yeah.
But what I want to acknowledge you for is how much thought you're putting into what the experience will be for the reader, not just from the, hey, I want them to get the whole story the way I wrote it, but also by its very nature, what you're writing.
Yeah.
Where can they take it from here is kind of what's coming up for me.
Okay. Yeah, actually, at the end of the booklet, there are a few self reflection prompts. So there's a free demo version that you can get, which basically ends on a cliffhanger. It gives about 25% of the story. Then there's this cliffhanger. Where's she going to go from here? But yeah, when you read the whole story, there are self-reflection prompts where it invites you to write or draw your own narrative. Like picture yourself being who you're meant to be. If your dark, damaging thoughts had an image, what would they look like? You can write or draw that. So basically creating your own story, which is very empowering. I also have an online course around this comic book as well, so that's a good next step for people to take. Well, I think that the most important step to take, though, would be the self reflection. Saying, okay, how can I create my own story from this?
Why?
Just thinking more, yeah, like thinking more about how inner demons can show up in their lives, and what ways might you have been unintentionally feeding them, and then in what ways can you go and crush them instead.
What I was going to say, I was about to interrupt. Why does this self-reflection matter for you? What's important about that for you?
Yeah, I feel like in my own story, self-reflection has been the most important part for healing because I've worked through eating disorders like anorexia, bulimia, depression, complex trauma, and also substance addictions of different kinds.
Mhm.
And just a lot of really negative mindsets, like the feeling that my life is not worth anything unless I can achieve this certain ambitious outcome. So to work through all of that, I've tried talking to other people about it, getting their perspective, tried some therapy here and there. And what I've realized is that issues related to eating, drinking, and work and emotion, everybody has their own opinion about them. Like
Mhm.
for example, like when it comes to eating disorders, everybody will tell you their philosophy about how they think that you should eat or drinking too when it comes to substance abuse issues. Everyone thinks you should drink in this way or this amount. Either, oh, you shouldn't drink alcohol at all, or
Mhm.
you should drink a little bit each day, or you should drink only on special occasions, but then really go for it. And like one time I was in one of those conversations with someone close to me, and I just had to cut him off and say, okay, hey, let me think for myself about it. Because this person was giving their
Mhm.
own philosophy about how they think that I should eat and drink, and oh, it should be this way. And then your mindset about your work should be like this. And then emotionally, you're not supposed to feel bad or discouraged. You're supposed to feel this way. And I was just like, hey, let me think for myself about this. Let me make my own decision. And I was like, wow, that felt good. Just saying, hey, let me make
Mhm.
my own decision instead of like, oh, yeah. But how would you do it? How do the experts do it? How do the 7 habits of highly successful people say to do it?
Yeah. Well, I want to jump in for a second because, man, that really puts a punctuation, an exclamation point, if you will, on kind of the story that you've been sharing. Because when you say that, I kind of look back at everything you've told us so far and I'm like, man, that's kind of, if I were going to grossly oversimplify it, that's kind of it, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
you first of all got to make your own decision and how you were going to express your life's experiences, right? Well, I'm going to do
Yeah.
it as a comic book instead of a book, even though everybody said you got to write a book, right? And
Yeah.
then not only did you decide for yourself in terms of how you were going to express it, by the very way you've created it, you've also invited everyone else to think for themselves about
Yeah.
how they choose to consume it or to receive it.
Yes, exactly. That is the beauty of art is that it can be used in different ways and it can be interpreted. Like, for example, a piece of music, a song, that can be something that people just listen to. It can be like background music to enliven the experience, or you could learn how to play the song on an instrument or sing it and replicate it in that way, or you can use it as a springboard to write your own song, or it could contribute as background soundtrack to some sort of video like a movie or social media content or anything like that. So there's a lot of different stuff you can do with a piece of art
Mhm.
that is really empowering. I think that the most important thing is that you do something with it that helps you.
Well, and you also call attention to not only right there with what you said, but what you were saying earlier. As a coach, I also did some training to do sober coaching to help people who kind of fall in the gray area, who are questioning their relationship with alcohol and considering changing their relationship with alcohol, right? But one of the things that I have a conversation with folks like that, and we're not talking about folks who are chemically dependent, who need professional clinical help, right? I'm not qualified for that. But the gray area folks, one of the conversations is like, oh, a lot of times people will say, oh, I'm drinking a little bit more than what the published guidelines are or whatever. And I'm like, let's set all that stuff aside for a second. how are you drinking related to how you want to be drinking, right? What is your relationship with alcohol relative to the relationship you would rather have or want to have with alcohol? So I really appreciate you highlighting this whole, like, what is right for you? What is too much for you? What is too little for you? Where do you want it to be? Because, as you've already been sharing, that's so critical. Like, set aside what everybody else says for a second. What do you want? Right.
Yeah, that can be one of the hardest questions. Like, oh, what do I want? Would somebody isn't necessarily tell me what to want, right? Oh, there's a lot of like, oh, society can tell you what you want, or people close to you can tell you what you want. Yeah, so there's a lot of soul searching that needs to be done there, and I feel like the arts are a really good portal to that.
I love it. Lilia, let's go into the third question. And again, I'll continue to go back and forth as you need to. Third question is, what have you learned about yourself as a result of sitting on this comma?
Yeah, I've learned that something I really needed to work on was consistently establishing my own will instead of conveniently just formulating my mindset to agree with the person next to me just because it's more convenient. So that was a big part of it. And also, I learned that I really do like to mix the light with the dark. Instead of thinking of them as mutually exclusive, like the light in the darkness. There's a lot of dark humor involved in the Inner Demon Crusher comic book. And even with my music in the band Carcaso, there is also dark humor involved in that because it's metal, so it's heavy and kind of dark, but at the same time, some of the song lyrics have jokes embedded into them, and our shows are pretty funny and lighthearted. Like, I tell jokes sometimes, and they're not too serious.
What's important for you about mixing? Because that's a big thing, right? And
Yeah.
What's important? Let me just ask the damn question. What's important for you about mixing the dark and the light?
Well, because, the ironic thing is you really can't have pleasure without pain, because then what would you compare it to? Like, if everything was nice, then nothing is nice, because you define nice as being like better than average. Like, good is better than average. So you need a comparison for average, and you need a comparison for below average. And of course, dark times help us appreciate the bright times even more. So there's a lot of that. There's also just the idea that there can be an enjoyment within depression. This is just my own experience, because when I was dealing with major depression, the clinical strength version, it was weird in a way, because while my body felt completely drained, like the digestion wasn't working so well, I wasn't sleeping well. When I slept, there were all these dreams about death, and my senses were not working as well. My memory would lapse really badly, and my energy levels were super, super low. And yeah, my mind kept going back to a lot of dark things. But that is how I realized, well, I actually learned how to scream metal music from that experience, because I was just letting it all out cathartically. And then I learned how to control those kinds of vocal techniques to create this screaming sound for my band. So that was cool. And I also settled into that feeling. I got a lot of new ideas for my music and my dance choreography from those kinds of experiences. And they were not just about expressing the dark anguish of a tortured soul. They would end up being a lot of dark humor or bittersweet beauty, because I felt like these feelings allowed me to then create something which was a great experience.
What I'm hearing you kind of describe, you've already said you really kind of can't have one without the other, or that one makes you appreciate the other, but also one can feed the other, that each of
Yeah,
those
feed.
experiences can lead to things and prepare you or develop you into, teach you into something. You've already described a couple of outcomes of that depressive period.
Yes, for sure they can. That made me very keen on connecting the mind, body, and soul because how I work out of depressive episodes that are very heavy and long lasting is through a keen mind body awareness. Like I would listen to my body very closely, like how certain kinds of food affected me. Like, okay, if this kind of food makes me feel a little bit better, that one makes me feel worse. And also, when it is time to get physically active and moving, what kind of training will help to stimulate the adrenaline and endorphins being produced and get the gears turning more versus where exactly is the cutoff point where it's too much exhaustion.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
things like that were very critical to me, and they always have been.
Yeah. So a lot of learning from your experiences, and it sounds like a lot of things that have resulted in shifts for you. So I'll move to the next question. I feel like you've already answered some of this, but continue to add to the question, which is what has changed for you as a result of sitting on this or these commas?
Yeah, so these commas, they made me acknowledge that I am a dynamic person. So I feel like as an artistic and creative professional, sometimes we are encouraged to super niche down to one thing. Like, oh, imagine if you spent all your time just playing the guitar, you would be so much better than if you're also spending your time writing stories and dancing and also playing piano and singing and designing websites and teaching students and stuff like that. And, that's a really toxic mindset for a creative professional because that literally means that every time you do anything, you're guilty about not doing something else, right? Like every time I'm playing guitar, I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, but I'm playing guitar here. I could be going out and signing up more new clients, or vice versa. Oh, I'm teaching lessons right now. I should be practicing to become more of a virtuoso. Or I should be promoting my music. Or no, what if I just wrote stories all the time? I'd have such a high output and be like really high ranking on Amazon. So it's like that's such a
Mm.
death trap of your mind because literally when you have that way of thinking, like, oh, I should niche down to one hyper specific specialty, you're always going to feel guilty no matter what you're doing because there's always something else you could be
Mm.
doing.
You're
So,
you're speaking to me, by the
yeah.
way, and I know you're speaking to so many other people. And I want to just jump in on this because there are certainly plenty of people there are those people who do niche down and they are brilliant at focus and narrow and deep, and they serve very important roles in their own lives and in the world around them, right? And there are people that don't get acknowledged as much. I believe that's my belief, like yourself that you're describing, which is I like to go broad. I like to experiment with a lot of different things and put my fingers in a lot of different pies and be involved in a lot of different things. And so that doesn't often get celebrated as much because it there's labels and stigmas that come with that, like, oh, you don't ever finish anything, you're flighty, you're not focused. And it's not true at all. It's a
I
different.
do think that we all have to understand that actually one thing can help another. Like, for example, there was the time I was like 20 years old. I was having a really hard time coming up with a guitar solo for a song. So I went ahead and wrote a melody on piano and then transferred it over. That helped. Or sometimes dance can make you a much better musician because there are actually diminishing returns. Now, I've felt it, I've seen it. I feel like the law of diminishing returns totally applies to skills that you're doing. When you keep practicing the same thing over and over and over again, the same way, your brain just can't possibly hold as much conscientious focus on it because it's not a novel thing. New things spark a lot more attentiveness from the brain, whereas routine things like, about when you're 16 and learning how to drive, you're ultra focused. By the time you're like 50, 25, you're not nearly as focused anymore. You don't have to be. It's so routine. By the time you're like 25, you can already be, just driving and not even aware of what you're doing. Oh, I just ended up home. I would pay attention. It's like that. You might think it's okay if I niche down to one special skill, I'd be extremely skilled, or you could just run into a lot of dead ends. That's what happens to me. It's what happens to clients that I work with and other artists I collaborate with. They talk about these things like, oh, keep practicing towards the same goal, but then eventually I just hit this roadblock where I can't get any better. Especially true in sports. Like, let's say you're following a weightlifting program to build your strength. The same program, after about a year or two, it can virtually stop all gains because you do have to surprise your body with something different. So that has been so heavily proven in physical fitness, how you just reach this plateau that you cannot get around until you do something else and then reapply that new thing back to your original thing. Also
I was just going to say, I was going to jump in because I know a lot of folks in like the physical fitness industry and so forth. And that's why if you follow influencers who are into like physical fitness influencers, that's why you'll see them toggle back and forth between cutting and bulking. Like they have to introduce that element of surprise and change it up every now and then in order to get new or different results, right?
Yeah. Also like strength versus endurance, because if you're all strength and no endurance, you just can't sustain your workouts very long. So you have to incorporate some of that endurance. You just need to refresh your perspective. The same thing applies for cognitive skills as well. Like if you're just going to write fiction stories about vampires every day, eventually your well of ideas will run dry. You're just going to keep making the same stuff over and over and over again. Yeah, I need to refresh. I consider for myself, because my mission is helping people conquer inner demons through creative arts. Well, inner demons are never niche. There's not a single inner demon that's just one narrow thing. Like if someone's inner demon is an alcohol addiction, you better bet that is tied to emotional trauma. It's tied to some distorted mindsets about their role in society. Inevitably, you can't possibly have a drinking problem without some way or another an eating problem, because it disrupts your digestive system and your sense of hunger and fullness cues, your cravings. So then from a drinking problem, you could develop an eating disorder potentially. So, and then it could also get into anxiety or depression. Now, it's probably already anxiety or depression there. That's why you started. And there's this whole like chicken, egg stuff feels like that's just one example that is common to a lot of people, where they're working with one specific problem, but then it's related to so many other things. There is never going to be an instance where you have one inner demon that's just super niched to itself. So, because my brand is about inner demons, those are not niche. So it wouldn't make sense for my approach to be niche to one focus either, because that's not how they work. Because I do believe that you have to learn how to use their tricks against them. So if the inner demon's trick is pulling from all these different wells, mixing them all up in this weird distorted way that is hard for you to follow, you've got to do something similar. You've got to draw from a lot of different wells and put them together.
So I so appreciate everything that you've shared so far, and this experience of really kind of being able to think for yourself, being able to be flexible and adaptable, and allow that artistic expression to come through in your work and in just how you experience your life. Let me go ahead and ask the fifth question. And the fifth question is, Lilia, what does getting off the comma look like for you?
Yeah, getting off the comma looks like, for me, embracing who I am, having a clear sense of self. And it means that I can attune my own mind and body to each other instead of tuning my mind into this other person's mind just for convenience sake. It means following my purpose, which is something that I've always held as a lot of importance, feeling like my life has a purpose and doing that.
Mm. Well, and you certainly have shared with us too how, getting off the comma for you meant essentially, this is kind of my summary. So tell me, if I'm off base, but kind of taking your own experiences and then being able to translate those into stories to inspire others. But that basically anything dark that had happened to you ended up having a
Yeah.
bright side that you could share.
Yeah, and I do think that we are also responsible for finding that bright stuff and making it, because it's been proven that what you focus on grows. So if you focus on shit, then the shit will grow. Literally.
Mm-hmm.
We can create our own realities based on where our focus lies. So to have a self-discipline of saying, like, okay, this is a dark experience, but what can I do with this? Goes a long way, because there's lots of stuff that is outside of our control. So I can't necessarily solve every problem, but you can discipline yourself to constantly be looking for solutions. So then when that door opens up, you can just walk right through that door of solution land instead of just saying in problem land.
Yeah, it's kind of the old adage, you can go buy fish or you can learn how to fish, right? Or you can learn how to fix the problem, or you can be really good at fixing problems, right? So, yeah. Okay. Lilia, as we bring things to a close, obviously there's so much more we could have dug into in your story, but podcasts are limited in their timing. So if folks wanted to learn more about you, find out more about you, potentially connect with you, tell us, where can people find you? And I'll put all of your links in the show notes for people to access.
Yeah, the best place to start is my website, liliademoncrusher.com, because from there on the homepage, you can check out those different elements that I was talking about, like the comics you can order, online courses, coaching, or just dig into my blog and just read some more about these topics. And it'll also take you to my social media pages. So on YouTube, I am Lilia, the Inner Demon Crusher. Same with on Facebook. I also have a Facebook page called Lilia, the Inner Demon Crusher. And then on TikTok, it's just a little shorter, Lilia Demon Crusher. Then on Instagram, I just use my name, Lilia_Bogoeva, because on Instagram, I mix some of my business and also some of my personal life into it. So it's just like, hey, this is me.
Nice, nice. Last thing before we close is something I do with every guest. And I call this section acknowledgements, because we've certainly been fortunate to hear from your story and add your story to our collection and hear about your life and your experiences. But your story wouldn't be complete if we didn't give you an opportunity to share the story of others who matter to you. And so in this section, it's an opportunity for you to give a voice or boost or lift up other folks in your circle. And that could be causes, organizations, other creators, or even just people within your life or family that matter to you. So who would you like to acknowledge today?
Yeah, I would like to acknowledge the Montgomery Area Musicians Association. They're a nonprofit based out of Montgomery, Alabama. Now, I am the treasurer on the board of the Montgomery Area Musicians Association, abbreviated as MAMA. And, they've been very essential to my development in my career, because their conferences and meetings gave me a platform to start speaking about these topics of crushing inner demons through creative arts. And the people in that organization are so open-minded. They embrace all different kinds of music and different kinds of art as well. And although we're based out of Montgomery, Alabama, Mama also has online opportunities. So anyone who's interested in music in any way should go ahead and check that out. It's montgomerymusicians.org. And even if you don't live in the area and you want to become a member, there are online networking opportunities and music education opportunities through them. It's overall a great organization.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And I definitely encourage folks to go and check out the link in the show notes, all of these links in the show notes. And Lilia, we just thank you so much for opening up and sharing your story with us about getting off the comma today, and look forward to following your story where it goes from here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Paul. Yeah, this was really fun and inspiring, and I appreciated your input a lot too.
Nice. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
What an honor it is for me to witness these powerful stories. I hope you feel the same way too. Think about what you learned from this conversation. What stood out for you? What challenged you? What inspired you? And I encourage you to write it down in some form of journaling and reflection. Surprises can reveal themselves to you when you do this. And if you were moved by today's conversation, pass it along to someone you care about. Let's spread the word. Let's continue to build connection. And if you do discover something you'd like to unpack further, book a call with me and let's talk about it. My links are in the show notes. Be sure to like this episode, follow the podcast here on this platform and social media at Off the Comma, and feel free to comment and interact with these posts and episodes. Check out my website for workshops, events, and my sponsor community. I'm covering the costs of production by curating my own sponsors who align with our vision. Be sure to check them out. They're all powerful people and businesses. Thank you for listening to this episode of Off the Comma. As always, keep noticing and keep listening.